Hello and welcome to Pleasure Reading. I'm your host, Amelia Ruby, and this is a podcast about the pleasure of reading, where I share curated reading lists, author rankings, chats with my bookish friends, and more. If you too take pleasure in reading, I hope that you will subscribe and share this show with a friend. Cheers to your next best book. Hello and welcome back to Pleasure Reading. This is a podcast all about the pleasure of reading, where I, Amelia, your host and fellow book lover, share curated book lists, some fave recommended reads, tiny book chats, which are yet to come, and today, a bookish TBR, my list of books I want to read on a particular theme. Throughout the fall, I have been curating a very special little book list for myself that is honestly very niche and maybe no one cares, but I'm excited about it. And now that spooky season is in full swing, I'm going to tell you all about these books. So I have collected what I'm calling my Pink Horror TBR, and I plan to read all of these books over the next 6 to 8 weeks, and maybe I'll do an update on what I thought about them afterwards if folks want that. But for today, I thought I would just tell you a little bit about how I brought all these books together, what each one is about, and which ones I am most looking forward to reading. Before I get into my Pink Horror TBR, I also wanted to share a little tip, a little fun thing that I have been enjoying in my bookish life lately, which is an audiobook exclusive from romance author Ali Hazelwood. So Ali Hazelwood is a New York Times best-selling author. She's a very popular romance writer whose first and I think most popular book is The Love Hypothesis, which is a really fun, nerdy science romance sort of thing. She also this year put out a book called Bride, which is a werewolf vampire romance that will be coming up in the next episode of Pleasure Reading. And I'm mentioning her today because just, I think 2 weeks ago when I'm releasing this, she put out a new audiobook exclusive that I have been loving. So it's called Two Can Play. You can listen to it on Spotify. If you have Spotify Premium, it's included in your subscription, or you can purchase it anywhere audiobooks are sold. And it's a really quick, fun, enemies to lovers, spicy romance that features two characters, Viola and Jessie, and they are both video game designers. And Jessie is Viola's arch nemesis kind of in her mind. His behavior to her is totally polite or whatever, but she has kind of built up this idea of why he doesn't like her based on a few things that she overheard him saying. And when their respective studios have to work together to create a video game based on her all-time favorite book series, she is in sort of forced close proximity with Jessie, and everything untangles from there. So I'm a fan of Ali Hazelwood, but I certainly have not read everything that she's written. And honestly, I'm not a huge fan of audiobooks. I don't listen to a lot of books on audio. I think because podcasting is my full-time job, I don't have a lot of time for other listening. But this one clocks in at 4.5 hours, which is super short for an audiobook. And I'm now about 2/3 of the way through and just really, really enjoying it. So if you have any fall chores coming up and you need an accompaniment for a few hours, highly recommend Two Can Play by Ali Hazelwood. It is an audiobook exclusive right now. I believe that there will be an ebook version coming out next year, but it's just a fun little snack of a book that you can play in your AirPods as you do other things. And I wanted to recommend it before we dive into today's topic. So, as I've already mentioned, this episode is about my Pink Horror TBR. And if you are tuned in, I'm guessing that one of your first questions is, Amelia, what is Pink Horror? And what it means to me right now in this moment is horror books that have pink covers. So I went to Barnes & Noble recently, which is definitely a bookstore I frequent in my town that does not have so many independent bookstores. And when I was there, they had a nice little horror display, and I noticed that many of the covers of these books were pink. and that most of the ones that were pink seemed to be written by women. And I was like, oh, cool, we're doing horror for girls. Got it. But as I read the descriptions, I was like, okay, but actually this is like really for me. Like, I really want to read this. And I ended up taking home, I think, 4 horror novels with pink covers that day in September, and then collecting 1 more in October and building this Pink Horror TBR for myself. So today I want to tell you about these books, and I want to know if you've read them. If you have, please head to my website, send me an email, tell me what you thought of them. And maybe I will report back in the future about what I thought once I actually read them. So let's dive into the TBR. These are in no particular order. I am just going to share the title, the author, what the book is about, why I'm excited to read it, and we'll go from there. The first book on my Pink Horror TBR is Pink Slime by Fernanda Trías. This book was originally published in Spanish and translated by Heather Cleary. And here is the synopsis. In a city ravaged by a mysterious plague, a woman tries to understand why her world is falling apart. An algae bloom has poisoned the previously pristine air that blows in from the sea. In the short, desperate breaks between deadly windstorms, our narrator stubbornly tends to her few remaining relationships. With her difficult but vulnerable mother, with the ex-husband for whom she still harbors feelings, and with the boy she nannies, whose parents sent him away even as terrible threats loomed. Yet, as conditions outside deteriorate further, her commitment to remaining in place only grows, even if staying means being left behind. I feel very aware that maybe nobody wants to read pandemic literature, but it's not a no for me. And I think I felt particularly drawn to Pink Slime because at the beginning of 2021, I watched a sort of thriller horror movie called The Pink Cloud that was a Sundance pick that year. And it had a very similar premise to this book. And as we were living in lockdown and I was watching this movie that was released in 2021, but made in 2019 before the pandemic, it just really had me reflecting on how prescient it was and how much I felt there kind of was to gain from sitting with these depictions of plagues and pandemics and crises while experiencing them. And similarly to The Pink Cloud, Pink Slime was written before the COVID-19 pandemic. It was written, I think, in like 2017, and it's only now being translated into English. So there's just something in this for me that feels prescient, feels present, feels important to reflect on. And there's also something in the pinkness of it that is drawing me in. So that's Pink Slime by Fernanda Trías. I can't wait to read it. And I will be thinking about that movie, The Pink Cloud, the whole time, I'm pretty sure. Okay, second book on my Pink Horror TBR is Guillotine by Delilah S. Dawson. This book was just released in September of 2024, and it's set to some degree in the world of fashion magazines and publishing, which of course is always like an immediate draw for me as a lifelong lover of The Devil Wears Prada. So let me read you the synopsis so you can be in on the story. Thrift fashionista Des Lane doesn't want to date Patrick Ruskin. She just wants to meet his mother, the editor-in-chief of Nouveau magazine. When he invites her to his family's big Easter reunion at their ancestral home, she's certain she can put up with his arrogance and fend off his advances long enough to ask Marie Caulfield Ruskin for an internship someone with her pedigree could never nab through the regular submission route. When they arrive at the enormous island mansion, Des is floored. She's never witnessed how the 1% lives before in all their ridiculous, unnecessary luxury. But once all the family members are on the island and the ferry has departed, things take a dark turn. For decades, the Ruskins have made their servants sign contracts that are basically indentured servitude. And with nothing to lose, the servants have decided their only route to freedom is to get rid of the Ruskins for good. ... So that's where the synopsis ends us. And I am really intrigued by this story overall. I feel like it's giving a bit of Blink Twice, the new movie that came out this year. I also think it has something of like The Menu in it. So I guess with both of these first two books, there are like horror film references I have that make me excited to read these stories. And with Guillotine, actually, there's a blurb on the front from T. Kingfisher that calls it Glass Onion meets Saw. So I think that there's going to be some great class commentary, privilege commentary, and hopefully like an overall fun, bloody time in this book. Okay, on to the third book on my Pink Horror TBR. This one is called The Night Guest by Hildur Knútsdóttir, which is an Icelandic name that I'm not sure I'm pronouncing correctly. But this book was translated into English by Mary Robinette Kowal. Also not sure if I'm saying that correctly. And I think the premise of this one is super cool. So let me read you the synopsis with yet again the caveat that I do not know how this main character's name is pronounced, and I may get it extremely, extremely wrong. Eden is in yet another doctor's office. She knows her constant fatigue is a sign that something's not right, but physicians dismiss her symptoms and blood tests don't reveal any causes. When she talks to friends and family about it, the refrain is the same. Have you tried eating better, exercising more, establishing a nighttime routine? She tries to follow their advice, buying everything from vitamins to sleeping pills to a step-counting watch, but nothing helps. Until one night, Eden falls asleep with the watch on and wakes up to find she's walked over 40,000 steps in the night. What is happening when she's asleep? Why is she waking up with increasingly disturbing injuries? And why won't anyone believe her? I am so excited to read this book. I think this premise is really interesting. I'm like, what if the monster is burnout all along? It feels a little bit like Night Bitch meets maybe like Fight Club. I don't know. I can't wait to see how this mystery will unfold. And if you've read it, like, don't tell me till I've actually read it. So the first three books, again, on this Pink Horror TBR have been Pink Slime by Fernanda Trías, Guillotine by Delilah S. Dawson, and The Night Guest by Hildur Knútsdóttir. And I'm really loving that two of these have been translated into English. I appreciate translated literature in general, but I especially think when we're talking about horror and we're digging into our deepest fears, it's so interesting to see how that translates cross-culturally. Because sometimes the things that we're afraid of are so culturally specific, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're like deeply human. And so I really like to read translated horror to see like, how does this land with me? How does this hit for me? And honestly, sometimes it's like a total miss. Sometimes I'm like, that was not scary. I don't get it. Or sometimes I'm like, I think the translation really missed something here. And then other times it is like my favorite. And I am like, whoa, that went so much deeper, darker, more raw, whatever for me. I'm thinking particularly there of Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Bazterrica, which really blew my mind earlier this year in terms of translated horror that like haunts my dreams. So we've got two translated novels in our first three books on the Pink Horror TBR. Now let me tell you about the last two on this list. So number 4 on my Pink Horror TBR is youthjuice by e.k.sathue, or maybe that's Sathue. Again, not so great with the pronunciation, but this is a pseudonym for the author Erin Mayer. And this book feels like it would fit right in with my Girl Boss book list, horror edition. So let me read you the synopsis so you know what it's about. From Sophia Banyan's first day on the storytelling team at Hebe, a luxury skincare wellness company based in New York's trendy Soho neighborhood, it's clear something is deeply amiss. But Sophia, pushing 30, has plenty of skeletons in her closet next to the designer knockoffs and doesn't care. Though she leads an outwardly charmed life, she aches for a deeper meaning to her flat existence and a cure for her brutal nail-biting habit. She finds it all and more at Hebe, and with Tree Whitestone, the company's charismatic founder and CEO. Soon, Sophia is addicted to her new lifestyle, especially Youth Juice, the fatty, soothing moisturizer Tree has asked Sophia to test. But when cracks in the company's infrastructure start to worsen, and Sophia learns the gruesome secret ingredient at the heart of Youth Juice, she has to decide how far she's willing to go to stay beautiful forever. So yeah, this one definitely feels like it's got a bit of the Natural Beauty by Ling Ling Huang vibe, maybe meets like a sort of Bret Easton Ellis American Psycho situation. And I think it is pretty bloody based on this like big drip of blood on the cover and the blurb from Rachel Harrison that says this novel is a blood-smeared mirror. So I am really excited to read it. I haven't read a lot of like slasher books, but I'm intrigued to see if this will get that bloody or not. And I think that the general like setting of sort of affluent wellness company with skincare products gets maybe taken down from the inside. Like, that's just an extremely me-coded plot. Like, the first episode of this podcast was a list of books about girl boss influencers, and I think this could be right at home on that list as well. So very excited to read Youth Juice by e.k.sathue this season. And that takes me to the fifth and final book of this Pink Horror TBR. So unlike the others, this one is a short story collection. It's called The White Guy Dies First, 13 Scary Stories of Fear and Power. And this was edited by Terry J. Benton-Walker with so many amazing contributors. I'm going to read their names in case you're familiar with some of the ones that I'm not. So contributing to this collection, we have Farida Abike Iyamide, Kaylin Bayron, Kendar Blake, H.E. Edgman, Lamar Giles, Chloe Gong, Alexis Henderson, Tiffany D. Jackson, Adiba Jagardar, Nassim Jamnia, Mark Oshiro, Karen Strong, and Terry J. Benton-Walker, who is the editor of the collection. And this book really feels like an ode to, I want to sort of say like horror for outsiders, which really means like horror for non-cis white males, right? The White Guy Dies First is the name of the book. And while I haven't read the stories in the book yet, what I know from just quickly perusing a few is that it's really pushing back against the sort of final girl or final white guy tropes and the like overwhelming evidence that we see, especially in the history of horror films, where the Black characters or BIPOC characters or promiscuous female characters are killed off first as a sort of cultural moralizing about the fact that those people don't survive in our society. And so I love that this collection faces that head on. And I also love that each of the stories has a sort of different horror genre or trope that it's taking on. So we've got a story about killer clowns. We've got a story about the paranormal, cannibals, the occult, a slasher. We have a found media story, a post-apocalyptic survival story. We've got body horror. We've got home invasion, demonic possession, haunted house, nature's revenge. And we've even got Alexis Henderson writing a Southern Gothic story. So this collection just looks so exciting to me. The list of authors is so diverse. It's openly critical of white supremacy in horror culture, and I cannot wait to read it. I think I'm going to do a little like 13 days of Halloween, read a story a day sort of thing. And if you want to do that too, make sure you go ahead and get your copy of The White Guy Dies First. Send me an email. Tell me which ones are your favorites. I would love to hear from you about this collection. So that's it. We have now gone through all 5 books on my Pink Horror TBR. Just to recap, they are Pink Slime by Fernanda Trías, Guillotine by Delilah S. Dawson, The Night Guest by Hildur Knútsdóttir, Youth Juice by e.k.sathue, and The White Guy Dies First, edited by Terry J. Benton-Walker. I feel like I need to just like stop this episode so I can go start reading immediately. But before I do, I also want to remind you of that super fun new audio novella from Ali Hazelwood. It's called Two Can Play. You can find that linked in the show notes, as well as links to all of these books. For everything in the Pink Horror TBR, I have included links to my bookshop. So if you make a purchase through those links, I will receive a small affiliate payment that I just take as a little thank you for the book rec. I will also link my website in the show notes and my contact page. So if you do want to reach out about anything that you're hearing that I'm reading on the show, you can click the link and reach out to me directly there. I would love to chat with you about these books. And I think I'm going to get to reading. I'll be back next week with a curated recommended list of creature features, scary and non-scary editions. Until then, it has been a pleasure reading with you today. Here's to your next best book.